Hello, my name is Mallory Jenna Robinson. Join me on A Hateful Homicide, a true crime podcast dedicated to telling the stories regarding the murders of transgender, gender non-binary, and gender diverse community members in the United States and abroad. This is A Hateful Homicide.
911, what's your emergency?
Yeah.
A transgender woman has been shot and killed in North Baltimore. Alpha?
In the U.S., trans women of color have a life expectancy of just 35 years.
This happens on a daily. Another one of my friends got killed right up the street from here.
These cases are true. The victims are real, and their voices matter. This is A Hateful Homicide. The murder of Camila Guzman. Monday, August 1st, 2011, East Harlem, New York.
National Transgender Rights Attorney, and I stand here in solidarity with the family and friends of Camila, including my colleague Flor Ramirez, who works at Lambda with me. Mi nombre es Ruth, yo trabajo con Lambda Legal y estoy aquí en solidaridad con la familia y los amigos de Camila y con mi colega Flor Bermúdez, que también trabaja con nosotros. Stand here as an ally. Although I'm a transgender person, transgender women of color are by far the targeted part of our community. And I stand with the trans sisters, once again speaking about the violence against trans women of color. I was just in Puerto Rico at a conference, and they were talking about the trans women who've been targeted down there. And I came back home to this, and I thank each one of you for being here in the street and remembering Camila. And I want to say that even though her life was lost, a beautiful life lost, another life lost, she came to the United States and she was herself, and she lived her dream, and she was who she was inside, and she should not have been killed for that. That's right. Yo soy un aliado, aunque yo también soy una persona transgénero. La realidad es que las mujeres transgénero de color son las víctimas principales de la violencia que existe en contra de las mujeres transgénero por su elección de expresar su género. De nuevo, otra vez estamos aquí recordando y reuniéndonos por la muerte de alguien de nuestra comunidad. Yo acabo de venir de Puerto Rico, donde también estábamos sufriendo la violencia en contra de las personas transgéneros allí. Y llegué aquí para encontrar esta historia. Hoy estamos recordando a Camila y sabemos que ya no está aquí, que necesitamos justicia, pero una cosa que podemos recordar es que Camila vino a este país, pudo ser lo que ella es, pudo ser quien ella quería ser, pudo ser quien ella era por dentro. Tenemos que celebrarla y recordarla de esa manera. As Ruby and Carlos said, we are human beings first. And until we have equal access to jobs and public accommodations and options in life, trans people will continue to be on the front lines and be the target of violence like this. So we all need to work together because we're all one family. So thank you for coming on today. Como Carlos y Ruby dijeron, nosotros somos todos y todas seres humanos, pero mientras continuemos viviendo en una situación de discriminación en los trabajos, en los lugares públicos, vamos a estar al frente de la batalla y también lamentablemente vamos a estar al frente de las víctimas de la violencia. Entonces tenemos que luchar. Les quiero dar a todos muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Justicia lo que pedimos, justicia y apoyo de la policía.
It's Monday, August 1st, 2011, around 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, when neighbors and friends became alarmed that they hadn't heard from their friend, 38-year-old trans Latina female, Camila Guzman. They went over to her home to do a welfare check, and when they walked through the door, they discovered Camila's lifeless body laying in the living room, blood everywhere, with a pillowcase wrapped around her head. Friends and loved ones wanted to know what happened and immediately called the East Harlem Police Department. Within minutes, they were out wanting to know the life of Camila Guzman. Her friends and her co-workers informed the detectives that she was a trans woman who had immigrated from Chile and was also in this ongoing on and off domestic violence type of relationship with her current boyfriend, 25-year-old cisgendered male, Equan Southall. This African-American 25-year-old cisgendered man had came into Camila's life just a little over 5 months prior to this hateful homicide on August 1st of 2011. So detectives had this information to go off of. And of course, they asked Camila's friends and co-workers if they had any idea of where Equan was staying. The two where this hateful homicide occurred, which was on East 110th Street, the apartment that they shared, the 1 bedroom, 1 bath. Neighbors knew that that is where Equan was residing at the time. They had also informed the detectives, specifically Detective Chad Cortez, regarding the abusive relationship by the hands of Equan towards Camila, and also the fact that Equan had stolen from Camila multiple times. Friends and loved ones had also expressed their fear and concern for Camila's safety, as well as Camila expressing concerns for her own safety. She loved Equan, but she didn't quite know how to get out of this abusive relationship. Described as a love-hate kind of relationship, Equan could go from being very loving and wooing to all of a sudden being the most verbally and physically abusive guy ever. Again, Camila, who had immigrated from Chile just a little over 5 years prior to New York to get a better life, to be able to live her life freely and boldly as a trans woman, as a trans Latina woman, had become an instant success in New York with over hundreds of friends and loved ones who just adored on her, as well as her loved ones back in Chile. Camila continued to thrive in department store work as well as advocacy work with getting connected with the trans Latina organizations out in New York. And through 2005, up until her untimely death in 2011, the hateful homicide that she never saw coming by the hands of someone that she loved, Camila's life was thriving. However, around the latter part of March 2011, specifically March 23rd, she is at a club and she meets 25-year-old cisgendered male Equan Southall. Equan Southall, who had been a native of Brooklyn, had came over to the East Harlem area where he set his sights on Camila, and the two hit it off. He was aware of her gender identity status as a trans woman, as well as her status of being from Chile and building her life in New York. It seemed to be a success. The two seemed to hit it off, though Camila was about 12 years his senior. The two seemed to have slight things in common, such as their love of video games, their love of music, as well as their love of movies. And they would share those passions for the next 4.5 months. But throughout those 4.5 months, my audience, thank you for being here. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you. Throughout this time, Camila and Equan's relationship would get combative. It was described as a relationship where he wanted her income, basically. So when she would get paid from her job, which was a bi-weekly income, he would then really demand her money. And in the beginning, because she wanted to keep that relationship, maintain that relationship, hold it, the relationship that she had so desperately wanted since moving to New York. Camila had had a series of unsuccessful relationships from her time in Chile, where she grew up, and then from the time that she immigrated into New York around 2005. And she had a series of relationships, again, that were unsuccessful. And so I think by this time, by the early part of 2011, when she enters this relationship with Equan Southall, again, this native of Brooklyn, Equan described as this tough bad boy from the streets of BK, born in 1986 and completely had already had issues with violence multiple times prior. He had also received charges of grand larceny and possessions of a concealed weapon. And so he had already had 5 prior arrests, according to the advocate.com. And so Equan, this bad boy who was also charming and good looking, and according to Camila, who she shared with her friends, he was also an amazing lover. So they had this synergy of sex and movies and communication at times, and this romance that would be very on and off. And jealousy would come into play as well. Camila described this as beautiful, standing 5'6", beautiful trans-Latina woman, born in 1973 in Chile. She completely was very independent. She thrived on being herself and loving on others. She had a close relationship with her family. She began her gender journey in her early 20s, in the mid-1990s. And so she had this life that she had been living truthfully, but not completely. And that was what prompted her around her early 30s and the early 2000s to begin that process of immigrating from Chile to the United States. And she specifically chose New York because New York has been described as the Big Apple in this land, and specifically city and state of opportunities. It's also the city that never sleeps. And so she knew of some of community members prior from Chile that had immigrated to East Harlem in that area prior. And so that is where she would go out and settle in that East 110th Street apartment onward from 2008 until the time of her hateful homicide. Again, she never saw this coming. She was afraid for her safety. She did, mention to loved ones that if she did fail to show up to work one day, which she did fail to show up to work on that Monday morning, August 1st, she was scheduled to be at work around 8 a.m. At a local department store. And when she did not show up, that is when her coworkers became alarmed, and they reached out to her neighbors, who also became alarmed because they had heard some early signs of struggles that morning, probably around 3 a.m. between her and typically what would be the voice of her boyfriend, Equan Southall. But they certainly did not suspect that it had escalated to a potential missing persons and or hateful homicide, and that would be the case when her body was discovered around 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in her East 110th Street apartment. Again, forensics was brought out immediately, and Detective Chad Cortez and his team, as well as the forensics, had swiped the apartment. They were able to get the scrapings of DNA underneath Camila's fingernails. And within that, they were also able to discover that Camila had been stabbed multiple times throughout her back, her throat slit. She had also been, her candlestick, her beloved candlestick that she had brought with her from Chile, was used as an additional murder weapon. So not only was she stabbed and her throat was slit, but then she was bludgeoned multiple times throughout the head and the back. And then the final efforts to assure that Camila was dead was to then take a pillowcase off of her pillow in her bedroom and then wrap that with duct tape. And so when her friends and her coworkers and her neighbors entered her home on East 110th Street at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and discovered her lifeless body, blue and bludgeoned with red and this coagulated blood that had settled around her. So you have this backdrop of this, hot summer day in New York, and it's a Monday afternoon, and neighbors and friends who are, somewhere between taking their lunch break and coming back, but are also concerned about Camila because of the fact that she had this abusive relationship with Equan, a relationship that she was wanting to get out of, but still at the same time wanting to make work. And so unfortunately, the relationship seemed to escalate towards further violence, where he had put his hands on her once before, just about a couple of weeks before this hateful homicide, around the mid part of July of 2011, July 14th specifically, where he then, viciously punched her several times just for simply not giving over her paycheck. Again, this was a point of contention for both Equan and Camila. She wanted to comply with giving him parts of her check and her money, but at the same time, she needed to survive. And so, her friends and her loved ones, even those back in Chile, was telling her, you need to speak up for yourself. And when she would, right, my audience, when she would speak up to Equan and stand up and say, hey, I don't want to give you my check. I need to pay bills, and I also need to go and get my hair done, or go and, get my nails done, which she was known for doing. He would then react in such a way of violence. And it had became verbal initially, and then it became physical. And then by this Monday, again, neighbors, ear witnesses could hear struggles around 3 a.m. on the morning of August 1st, 2011 in this East 110th Street apartment. And you hear this struggle, and you hear these scuffles, and you hear like a bump of, of what sounds like a body falling into the floor. And that is how neighbors described it. But again, not really correlating that Camila had been murdered, and certainly that a hateful homicide had occurred, until her coworkers and friends had became alarmed and reached out to neighbors who they knew would be in the area and that could reach out and then go and check on Camila, which is what happened again around 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So Detective Chad Cortez had put out an all-points bulletin for Equan Southall. And ultimately, Equan Southall would go into the 23rd Precinct in East Harlem, where he would turn himself in on August 2nd, 2011, and confess to the hateful homicide of Camila Guzman. He really didn't give a motive for the crime, but again, her friends who had been brought in and interviewed between the afternoon of August 1st up until August 2nd of 2011 and so forth, had again described this very toxic and abusive relationship between Camila and Equan. And when Detective Chad Cortez and his team would go in and separately interview Equan, he would go on and say things that, she wouldn't listen. She talked back. She was known for, just not wanting to, I guess, fall in line. And Equan, again, this bad boy who had 5 prior arrests for larceny, violence, robbery, you name it, that was something he was not going to stand for. There was also alleged rumors of Equan being in a gang, and there's not quite sure concrete on if he was in a specific gang, but there is this gang correlation and association that he's been affiliated with since the late 2000s. And specifically around 2009, which is where one of those prior arrests came in, where it was associated with gang violence and gang affiliation. So again, there is that possibility of the fact that Equan was a gang member, and the fact that he was in a relationship with a trans woman, but then also a trans woman who was not going to be subdued and who was not going to be silenced, and who was entitled to her money that she worked hard for at a job that she had been at for over 2 years. And so, for Equan, this relationship that he had gotten into, and to be quite honest, my audience, partly assured to use her, seeing that Camila was a woman, an older trans woman in her later 30s who was looking for love, who deserved love. And he prayed and played on that. And certainly, I'm sure, again, like I mentioned earlier in the episode, that he was known to be a good lover to Camila as well. When things were good, they were really good. And so that definitely played into her attachment, her association, her willingness to give him chances after chances, her ability to forgive him with the verbal abuse, her ability to forgive him even after he put his hands on her just 2 weeks prior to the hateful homicide. And even though she suspected that, he could be violent,
certainly that early morning hours on Monday, August 1st, when they had a disagreement again about Camila's association with social media and talking to other guys, and then of course, like usual, money. Then he then goes and grabs a knife out of the kitchen, stabs Camila 10 times in the back, slits Camila's throat 2 times, then takes the candlestick that she brought, her beloved abuela's candlestick that was given to her, and takes it and beats her over the head an additional 10 times. And then when he wasn't sure if she was dead because she was still gurgling, according to him in his confession to the detective Chad Cortez and Detective Amelia Sorrentos, he then says that he couldn't bear to look at Camila's brutalized face that was unrecognizable. He then takes a pillowcase off of the bed that they shared and takes duct tape out of the drawer in the kitchen, and then goes and places it over Camila's head and wraps duct tape around the entirety of its face. So when her neighbors and her friends who had been worried about her since 8 a.m. that morning walked into Camila's home, that is the sight, my audience, that they walked in on, was a blood-soaked crime scene with Camila's face wrapped with duct tape, with the candlestick being left beside her body, with the knife still being left inside her throat. And these are the horrific images and imagery that they had to be left with. And these are the things that they shared in their interview about walking in and finding their friend. And they said that she never saw this coming, that she truly wanted this relationship with Equan to work and to thrive and to be successful, and for her to have trusted and loved this man, and for him to have come in and committed this hateful homicide, and then to so brazenly walk in the next day on August 2nd of 2011 around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and go in and boldly confess to killing her, but not really giving a motive, but just stating that, you know, she talked too much, but then also wanting to indicate about her gender identity also being a motive and or reasoning for this hateful homicide, which had nothing to do with it. The reality is that Equan did not like the fact that Camila was done with being his financial meal ticket. And when she spoke up and when she stood up and decided to say no more, he then, around 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on August 1st, that Monday, takes a knife, stabs her repeatedly, plunges her, covers her head with a pillowcase to assure that she's been suffocated, walks out of the home, which can be seen on CCTV footage at the East 110th Street apartment, and then leaves. He goes to his mother's, tells her what he's done. She encourages him to then turn himself in to the East Harlem Police Department, which he does, again, on that Tuesday, August 2nd at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My audience, you know, one of the things that we have to really talk about here, and we've taken a look at this in so many other cases, is intimate partner violence. Camila knew the man who would commit the hateful homicide. She met him on March 23rd, 2011, and by August 1st of the same year, she would be dead. She, who moved here years ago for a better life, for a successful life, for a life where she could thrive and be the best that she could be, would lose her life so heinously on that Monday. And what's so sad, my audience, is that she didn't get the chance to really be the success that she really wanted to be, that she saw for herself. She saw herself in management, in her department store role. She saw herself doing more traveling throughout the United States. She also wanted to go back and do work in Chile, especially advocacy work around trans women and violence. And she also wanted to continue to do advocacy work in East Harlem and raise awareness there. So all of these things were snuffed out for Camila, who had just celebrated her 38th birthday, and to know that her life would be taken so easily by someone that she had shared her home with is heartbreaking. But what I want to do now, my audience, is take a moment and share with you from an amazing episode of the Commonwealth Club, where these 3 amazing trans women come in and talk about the state of emergency, about violence against trans women, especially trans women of color. And you hear their perspective, and you hear about this violence, this growing insurgence of violence that's happening. And so I wanted to take a moment and share that with you all, so you can also get additional context to trans women who have lived to tell the tale of being victims and survivors of intimate partner violence.
About this belief that transgender people, going back to the idea of like why trans women are murdered, right? Yeah. What about this belief that these murders are happening in response to a deception, right? I mean, that's the thing that is constantly put out in the media through these court cases and pleading like I didn't know. What are your thoughts around that? Is there any truth to that? Is it mostly just stories?
It's propaganda. It's a lie. Like, most of us are not out here tricking. Is it some? Maybe. But most of the dudes, if you pay attention to the cases, they know. Mm-hmm. They already know. It's not it's just not. It's just, they are fine. They're enjoying us, however they enjoy us. And then usually is somebody outside of the enjoyment finds out. Mm-hmm. Or you're trying to, whatever status quo, like we just had a recent thing came out where, I think this person is trans, but where,
I know what you're talking about, yes.
Where a popular basketball player was exposed, allegedly, and now because his status quo is in jeopardy, his status and his masculinity, and now we have to threaten. They're trying to keep this status, and so I have to destroy you, because if I destroy you, you can't tell the truth and I can lie about it. You can't tell people that we've been texting all this time, because usually, like the girl in Dallas, I don't know, a couple of years ago, their text messages, he tried to lie and say he didn't know, but when the investigators found out, you've been knowing for months, and y'all been hooking up. You've been knowing what the tea was. And that's usually the case, and usually no, it's a lie to think that we're just out here tricking people, because it's just not the truth.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to go along those lines, there was a man named James Dixon who murdered Equan Southall in Harlem in 2014. And he stated in his trial that he did so because when he flirted with her, his friends made fun of him and he was embarrassed.
Right, coward. You're a coward. That's holding them accountable. Standing in manhood by saying, this is what I like. I'm gonna stand right here. Isn't that what patriarchy says a man does? Stand in what he likes and stand in what he does and mean what he say. You don't have to be clandestine, hiding in the back, doing stuff behind these closed doors. This is who I am. I'm the man. I like this. I like da-da-da-da-da-da. If you're doing that, then why are you hiding this?
Right. I was just on Instagram today and I saw through my feed that Laverne Cox reposted a picture that her partner had posted, who was a picture of the two of them and him saying, like, I am, a cisgender straight man. This is my partner. I love her. I think more, cis straight men need to come forward and admit that they love trans women and are attracted to trans women. Do you think that, and this is someone, of course, who, is also in a relationship with Laverne Cox, so is this newfound visibility, this moment that we're having, is this changing any of this stigma, or do you think it's actually increasing it?
No, I actually think it's increasing it. Okay, absolutely. Yeah. Honestly, it's a double-edged sword. Visibility and awareness does not fix my life. If visibility and awareness doesn't come with some real life mechanism to help me survive, it doesn't give me anything. You have to give me real life things to fix stuff about housing. Like, I don't get. One of the things I started my podcast is Marsha's Plate. One of the reasons why I wanted to start it is because in 2016, when they was going through elections, when they talked to trans folks, they were talking about a bathroom issue. And that's not saying that that's not important, but I got housing issues. I got income inequality issues. I got healthcare issues. I got so many things that are more important that my survival depends on than going to the bathroom. Or this is what they do. You say you are an organization that helps trans folks, but you don't want to hire us. Tell me that. You don't want to hire us, but you want us to come do the work for free. Right. You want us to create programs for you.
Show up so you can get paid.
Show up and you can pay. Or hire our drag girls because we need to do the benefit to raise you money.
Yeah. Right.
But you ain't really paying us. You go work for your tips and we take a little bit. No, come on. Like these people, we gotta hold, while we talk about holding the men accountable, hold some of the people that's allies accountable too.
And that's exactly what we have to do, is continue to hold everyone accountable, the ones who make sure that they perpetrate the hateful homicides, and even those who are supposed to be providing the justice. And so, again, when we go into Monday, April 29th, 2014, East Harlem, New York, it's the conclusion of the trial for Equan Southall. He's now 28. And he has been stand accused for the hateful homicide of his then 38-year-old transgender girlfriend, Camila Guzman. He's charged with second-degree murder, and the jury returns with a guilty verdict. Equan is then sentenced to 23 years to life in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2038. At the time of the murder, anti-violence activists pointed to the case as an example of both the risks transgender women and the incidence of domestic violence in the LGBT community. A May 22nd, 2014 press release from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office announcing the sentencing emphasized the same themes. This is it, quote unquote, from District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. Domestic violence can escalate in a heartbeat. It ends the lives of too many vulnerable individuals who may not know where to turn for help. In this case, the defendant brutally attacked and killed his girlfriend, a transgender woman and member of the LGBT community, at their apartment in East Harlem. I encourage domestic violence survivors to call my office domestic violence hotline at 212-335-4308 and visit the Manhattan Family Justice Center at 80th Center Street. So these resources, if you're in New York and are someone who has faced a similar situation as Camila, or even if you're somewhere else, please feel free. Know that there are resources that are available for survivors of and thrivers of intimate partner violence. And I think what we have to remember, my audience, is that so many times what we see here in these cases is that partners, especially our trans women, we get into relationships hoping for true love. We think and we believe that we have been accepted, right? And these are the things that we want to hear. And as you heard in the earlier video, it is great that we have visibility. It's great that we have cis men who are becoming more affirming of us and celebrating us and being in romantic relationships with us openly and boldly. But also, in addition to that, making sure that we're getting those resources such as housing, make sure that we're getting those resources such as employment and education access. These things are also pivotal. As you recall, around 2011, this was also a pivotal time for other rights regarding the trans community, such as military rights, such as bathroom and restroom rights, and even the ability to have sports for trans folks. So Camila Guzman was a proponent and advocating for all of that. And when her life was snuffed out on August 1st of 2011, around 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in her East 110th Street apartment, she again did not see this coming. She had so much going for herself and a life full of promise. And what we want to continue to do, my audience, is to make sure that we're raising awareness and speaking up and speaking out about victims of intimate partner violence. My trans women, my trans men, my non-binary and expensive community members. It is not okay to be hit. It is not okay to be spoken to abusively. It is not okay to be stalked. It is not okay to be harassed. It is not okay to be mistreated. It is not okay to be gaslighted. You are worthy of a true, loving relationship, of a partner that will affirm you, respect you, who will never put their hands on you, and certainly who will not make you feel less than. And unfortunately, Camila was in these series of relationships. And I hope today this case has resonated with you all to raise awareness of what is not accepted. When someone shows you who they are in these relationships, like Equan did, from demanding Camila's paycheck, from demanding that Camila gets off social media, from getting jealous over Camila having associations with friends and talking to her family back in Chile, or even just having male friends, right? All of these controlling behaviors that he displayed were red flags that everyone saw and acknowledged, even Camila herself. But she did not have the resources at the time to get out. And that is why I wanted to preface with what District Attorney Vance shared about the resources in Manhattan, as well as throughout the entire country. We do not have to settle for being abused. We do not have to settle for being stalked and or harassed. We are no one's property and have the right to live our lives and have the right to assertively speak up when we see red flags and when we have an indicator that abuse is about to escalate and continue. And that is what Camila was doing in the early morning hours of Monday, August 1st of 2011, when she spoke up against Equan, this 25-year-old cisgendered man who had 5 prior arrests, who was known for grand larceny, who had also stolen from her, who had also punched her and violently beaten her 2 weeks prior to her hateful homicide. These are the things that Camila was trying to get herself out of. But like so many of us, especially my trans women, my trans sisters, my trans femme folks, we seek the approval of our masculine trans men, our cis men so much, so many times, especially from our cis men, for the validity of femininity. And we sometimes will allow ourselves to be spoken to in a way that's unacceptable. We will allow ourselves to be physically abused in a way that we know is unacceptable. We hear the stories, these cautionary tales over and over again, whether it's a trans woman who's a survivor of sex worker violence, whether it's a trans woman who's a survivor of intimate partner violence, whether it's a trans woman who's a survivor of stranger danger violence. If you have lived to tell a story as a trans woman of violence, in these situations, what we have to continue to do is to make sure that now we raise awareness. And also, I have been a trans woman who has been a victim of intimate partner violence, and I can speak to that. I can say that when I began my gender journey early back in 2006, I was in a relationship prior with a guy, a cisgendered male, a white cisgendered male, who was abusive initially verbally, and then he became physically abusive. And I had the privilege of being able to get out of that relationship safely, thanks to the support of my family and my high school resources, because we both were in high school together. And so through the counseling and supportive services, I was able to get the help and support that I needed. And then when I became older, I was also the victim of a sexual violence situation in 2010, in February of 2010, where I literally had this guy who, upon discovering that I was trans, he immediately wanted me to perform a sex act. And had I not done that, he said that he would have murdered me. And these are the things that we can talk about as survivors and raise awareness so that way it does not happen again. And unfortunately, my situation that could have been very similar to Camila's happened in 2010, but her hateful homicide happened just a little over a year later in 2011. And going forward now, just a little over 10 years later since her hateful homicide that she never saw coming, I feel that it's my privilege to be able to speak on this type of violence that happens far too often in our communities because of the fact that these cisgendered men primarily feel that they can come into these relationships gaslighting, saying that they're going to love us, be with us. And as you heard, when their masculinity is threatened, when the enjoyment has been exposed by someone from the outside, they react in such a rage that becomes violent and it can even become homicidal. And this happens far too often, and because of the fact that they portray themselves as a partner of the victim, and then sometimes the partner of the victim and did not know of the of the victim's gender identity. They use this as a blaming, a victim shaming defense that we've seen far too often, where perpetrators will say they had no idea. But again, he was in a relationship with Camila for almost 6 months, and he definitely was living with her, shared space. They had sex, so he knew of that. And again, as you heard in other audio, a lot of times the partners do know, these cis men do know, and that does not give them the right to then go and verbally abuse, physically abuse, and murder someone, and then use, this victim blaming defense, trans panic defense as a reasoning, as a motive for committing such hateful homicides. Camila, who again came from Chile for a better life, for a promise, and was thriving and surviving so many things, dating woes, immigration status, dating with a purpose, wanting to become a manager in her department store, just navigating life as a 38-year-old trans woman, just as a 38-year-old woman in general in 2011. And all of that was cut short on that Monday of August 1st, 2011. Camila, who again had just celebrated her 38th birthday, who was getting ready for work that Monday, who had a life ahead of her, so much promise, so many goals and aspirations. All of that was cut short by, again, 25-year-old cisgendered male, African-American, Equan Southall, who could not handle losing Camila and her income when she decided to say no and speak up. And when she decided to speak up, he then decided to commit such a hateful homicide that will leave her dead on the floor with a pillowcase wrapped around her head, brutally stabbed and bludgeoned to death. And as we prepare to conclude this case, my audience, I just want to say again, thank you all so much for tuning in. Please continue to support. Follow us on Instagram at A Hateful Homicide. You can follow me on Instagram at MalloryJenna90. You can like us on Facebook. You can also like me on Facebook as well, Mallory Jenna Robinson and A Hateful Homicide. Please use the hashtags transgender awareness, true crime, trans awareness, trans woman, say her name, suspenseful Saturdays. Again, we have one more episode to the season 2 finale, so we will be having that episode next Saturday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then we will be getting ready to pick up season 3 on Transgender Day of Visibility of 2022, which is going to be this March. Again, my audience, thank you all so much for tuning in. My name is Valerie Jenna Robinson. I've enjoyed you all, and I hope you all continue to have an amazing day. Bye-bye.